So today you're going to be focusing on learning how to estimate with percents. And a lot of times we know how to estimate, we can just do that in our head, but we want to set up a method or a process that you're going to go through for your estimating so that we all get similar answers when these questions are asked. So go ahead and copy down your target. There's some tools for estimating with percents. You can think about compatible numbers. So, numbers that go well together because they have common factors. Like if you had 13 out of 24, that's a hard fraction to reduce or simplify, not a really common fraction. But if you make the 13 12, now 12 out of 24, they have common factors. I can reduce that down. 12 out of 24 is 1/2, and we know those percents. That is a common percent. That would be 50%. So look for compatible numbers. If you have to change one of the numbers by 1 or 2, that's okay. You just don't want to be changing it by a lot. The other thing that we're going to do, and we're going to use this one a lot, is round percentages to the nearest 5% and use the 10% rule. You can easily find 10% of a number by moving the decimal one place to the left. So when I look at this, if I have 55, well, 10% of 55 would just move the decimal here, and it'd be 5.5. So 10% is nice and easy to work with. And then once you have 10%, you could just divide that in half to get 5% if you really wanted. And in the bottom one, we kind of mentioned it, use common percents. So the percents that if you see 3/4, you know that's 75% right away. So if you have a fraction that you can make compatible in which it reduces down to one of these common percents, that's a great way to estimate. So let's look at this first example. What is 10% of 48? Remember that 10% is just going to be 48 moved with the decimal. So we're just going to move that decimal over from the end 1 unit. It's 4.8 or 4 1/8. What is 5% then? Well, 5% is just going to be half of that. So what's half of the 4.8? Half of the 0.8 is 0.4. Half of the 4 is 2. So it'd be 2 4/10. What is 20%? Well, once you have 10 and 5%, you can really get a lot of the other percentages. To get 20%, I would just take 2 10%, right? So what's 2 times 4.8? So with the 10% rule, you're really working from the 10% mainly, and then you may need a 5% on top of that. 2 times the 0.8 is going to be 0.6, carry the 1. 2 times the 4 plus the 1 is 5. So 5 6/10 would be 20% of that number. Oh, I'm sorry, not 5. 8 plus the 1 is 9. 9.6. And then the last one, what is 35%? So think about it. How could you get 35%? Well, knowing the 10% and the 20%, if you want, you could just add those together and then add in the 5%, right? 10% is 4.8, 4 8/10. 5% is 2 4/10. So far that's 15%. Plus the 20%, which was 9 6/10, to get you 35. So add those 3 decimals up, and that'll give you a great rounded value or estimated value for 35% of 48. We add these up, and we have 16 8/10. So find 10% first, then go from there. You can always double it or triple it to get 20 or 30%. You can break it in half to get 5%. So it's a nice thing to work with. So in example 2, and this is going to be most of our examples for today, let's just estimate using any method, okay? I'll show you a couple different strategies. If I want to find 21% of 66, you may want to round that number. I would round the least amount as possible, okay? So you don't want to change the problem too much. This is going to be about 20% of 66, and you could round the 66, but you don't really need to, right? How can we find 10%? Well, 10%, we're just going to move that decimal over 1. So 66, 10% of 66 will be 6 6/10. And now we want 20%, so we're just going to multiply that by 2. 6 times 2 is 12, carry the 1. 6 times 2 is 12, plus that 1 is 13. And then we move over 1 decimal place in our answer. So one way to estimate, maybe round the percent up or down 1 unit. I would try to round only one of them unless it's really difficult and you need to round both. Try the next one then, 35% of 120. Again, let's break it apart. So we might be able to find 10% pretty easy. Just move it over 1, so that'd be 12. And we have 5% pretty easy because that's only going to be half of it, so that's 6. Then to get 35%, we would have 3 10% plus the 5%. So we get about 42. 88 is about what percent of 180? So now we know that we want to find the percent. 88 is the part, and we want to know 88 out of 100 is about what percent? Well, this is a good one to maybe round that down. Get it to be a compatible number. 88 out of 180 is not very easy to reduce, but this is going to be about 90 out of 180, which is a great number to work with because we can reduce those both by 90 and get 1/2. So what percent would that be? It's about 50%. And you can put the about symbols if you want. And the last one, 20 out of 81, is about what percent? Well, again, 20 is the part, and we're out of the total of 81. We could approximate that to 20 out of 80, and then reduce that down to 1/4, which is going to be about 25%. So if you get it down to those fractions that you know and are comfortable with, you've seen them a lot, they're common fractions, then you can find the percent easily that way. With estimating, you might need to round a little bit, you just don't want to round a ton. So let's look at this third example, word problem dealing with estimating. The length of a football field is 83% of the length of a soccer field. If the football field is 100 yards, what is the approximate length of the soccer field? So when I see that two things are being compared, I kind of want to jump right into a proportion because I know I'm comparing two things, and that's what proportions are useful with. So a football field is 83%, and a percent is always out of 100. And the 83 represents the football field. I'm going to put a little FF here to remember that the top is representing the football field, which means the bottom then is representing the soccer field. If the football field is 100 yards, that means it has to go on top to match. We want to keep both the numerators focused on football field. What is the approximate length of the soccer field? Now, we could solve this and we could get an exact answer, but it just says what is the approximate length, so we can go ahead and estimate this. I would break this down. I would think about those compatible numbers. 83%, maybe we could round that to about 80%. So basically, I want to find about 80% of the 100. So I want to do this proportion instead if you want. It'll be a little easier to work with, and it'll work out a little neater, so we can round it here. So 80x is equal to 10,000, and then when we divide by 80, we can take a 10 out of both of these. 8 goes into the first 10 one time, remainder 2. 8 goes into 20 2 times, that gets me 16, so a remainder of 4. And 8 goes into 45 times. So the length of the soccer field is going to be about 125 yards. We found about 80% of the 100. Again, you could have just done 10% of the 100 and then multiplied it by 8 too, but I wanted to connect this to proportions for you. Okay, one last example, and this is just more of a little interpreting problem, I guess. How could you estimate the percent of words in the English language that begin with the letter B? So we just want to estimate this. You know, one simple, quick, easy way, although it may not be the most exact way, would be to just think about, well, how many letters am I talking about out of how many letters in the alphabet, right? So the letter B is one letter out of the 26 in the alphabet. Not that this is always true, but there's probably about 1 out of 26 English language words that start with the letter B. I would make that to be compatible numbers. So 1 out of 26 isn't a common fraction that I know, but 1 out of 25 isn't bad, right? So then to find the percent, think about that. What would I do to get this out of 100? If you don't know it right away, you would multiply the denominator by 4, and then the top gets the same thing. So 4 out of 100, or this would be about 4%. Again, it may not be the most exact measure, but approximately, I would guess that there are about 4% of the English language words that begin with the letter B. Okay, you're ready to move on your quick check. You have the quick check on here, and you can enter your answers on Blended Schools.